information shared in the following discussion is not intended as medical advice or for diagnostic purposes. Please seek professional assistance if you're experiencing any psychological or physical challenges. Welcome to Solutions for Life on the Couch with Claudette, psychologist and functional medicine certified health coach, bringing you conversations of hope, healing, and transformation. In this Unbecoming series, we are unpacking my fabulous 40s coaching program, and joining me is friend and colleague Alicia Porter. Alicia is going to be sharing her experience as a participant in the program, and we'll be talking about the challenges of women today, our health and well-being, change, and what true sustained transformation really entails. It's going to be a fun, challenging, and thought-provoking series. So welcome back, Alicia, for our second conversation about your Unbecoming journey through our Fabulous 40s coaching program. And take us through some of those highlights that we started talking about in our first conversation, the highlights of the deeper things that we went through that you felt contributed to the change elements. What stood out for you?
Hi, Claudette. It is lovely to be back. So I think quite early on in the process, one of the first sort of exercises or modules that we did was looking at our value systems. And I think that was the first time that I kind of had to stop because, and examine like my value system, number one, but also not just sort of examining it as this is your value, but actually looking to see what role or where does it feature in your life, or how do you prioritize this value that you perceive to be so important. And this realization for me that a lot of the values that I had, or the values that I held dear, or the values that were really like important to me, it was really sad when I realized that a lot of those values were not priorities in my life. And I can actually remember having quite a moment when this realization hit, that all of these things that are so important to me are actually featuring nowhere on my priority list. And that was really one of the first instances where I realized that that something needs to be different, because I also realized that there was a lot of outer expectations that was driving me that then would put my values on hold, and I would disappoint, and my inner expectations were not being met. And there was quite a disparity between the inner and the outer. And so that was one of the first kind of standstill moments during the course. Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think that's one of the things that attracted me so much to functional medicine as well. This recognition that we can be sick as people. I'm using that term loosely, but I'm saying like we can have dis-ease on so many levels, emotionally, mentally, even physically in our bodies. We can have dis-ease just because we are not ideally connected spiritually. And when I say spiritually, I don't just mean in our everyday language, we sometimes understand spiritual to mean like religious, in a religious sense, but spiritual sometimes can just mean simply like our connection to ourselves in terms of what's our purpose, once our sense of purpose, our sense of meaning, our sense of connection to our own inner desires. So something like our values, the things that we hold dear to, the things that are significant to us, and not having connection to that and not living congruently to that can bring about a whole lot of dis-ease in our life that can, on the surface, then lead to other things, like, having physical ailments and having psychological ailments and, other issues like burnout and being tired and, weight gain and other things like that. So did you feel like there was this connection
a realization that, okay, not living congruently to what I desired for myself or what was important and significant to me was creating some kind of dis-ease or situations in my life that were not ideal for me, and that I was being pulled more to maybe what other circumstances outside of my life rather.
I mean, I think it wasn't just a dis-ease. I think it was a disconnect. And I think even if I have to look at it, I think it was even one of the drivers of burnout, which I often flirt with, openly flirt with burnout, if not burnout. So I think it's not just a dis-ease. I think it was a complete disconnection. And that definitely impacted even my physical well-being, my gut health, for example, and even just my own mental health, because it's this constant, I mean, we spoke about the autopilot, but that's one of the things that puts you on autopilot when you're kind of just doing and doing and doing, totally driven by the outer. I mean, I, for example, recognize that, justice and kindness were very strong values. But the realization that I was practicing justice and kindness to others to the exclusion of myself was again like, oh my goodness, what have I done, But again, having to go back and examine then the narratives surrounding kind of even being kind to myself. I mean, now I say to people, the things that you tell other people, the things that you tell yourself, for example, would you dare tell them to other people? And there's not a person that has said to me, yes, I would tell other people exactly the same things that I say to myself. Because kindness, I mean, to ourselves is like a completely foreign, alien concept. But I think it has to do with the narratives that it's selfish to be kind to yourself.
So I mean, so there's two crucial things now that we're talking about. The one is the discovery that a lot of things might be happening to us on the surface that is not ideal in our life, and that could be happening because we're not living congruently to our values. And then the second thing is that when we realize we're not living congruently to our values, it might be so much easier to practice those values in relationship to other people or in relationship to the outside world, and so much harder for us to engage those values in relationship with ourselves. So how did that feel for you when that was pointed out, when we were starting to have conversations about that? So, when it was being pointed out, like how's Alicia doing with justice towards Alicia? How's Alicia doing with kindness towards Alicia? What was that narrative that you realized was coming out?
I mean, I sucked at it. But again, it was having to go back and not so, I mean, I think step one was the realization. Step two was kind of going back and seeing where it came from. And kind of while we know what the consequence has been, it was now to take a trip back and kind of say, like, where did this start? Like, and understand the behavior in order to change it. And I think that's been the difference. It's about understanding the behavior in order to change it, not just changing the behavior. Because I'm sure I could have said, okay, well, kindness to myself, let's book the spa, let's go away for the weekend, let's do all of those nice things. But it is so much harder than that. I mean, I think that those are nice things to do, but I don't know that that's truly going to result in a change in behavior. But it's about how do I understand this behavior? Where did that come from?
I mean, and for me, it was a similar type of questioning and understanding that I had to go through as well a few years ago. Because one of my values is, strong altruism, being understanding that, part of what drew me to my profession was wanting to help, wanting to be of service to other people. But, being in a state of recognizing that my own health is not in a good space, having to ask that question, okay, so I'm being a helper to other people, but how am I helping? How much of a help am I being to myself? And the narrative can so often be that, okay, if you are paying attention to yourself, then are you being selfish? So when you're exercising at 8 o'clock in the morning on a daily basis, and you're not in the psychiatric hospital attending to your patients, is that being selfish? And when you are taking walks in the morning or in the afternoon, and you're not consulting with clients in your office, is that being selfish? And so it was something that I had to stop and really be mindful of and consider and say, okay, am I being helpful to myself? And in doing so, that was my narrative, to be able to stop and say, okay, I'm doing this to be helpful to myself. And in so doing, I'm showing up as a better version of me. And that is not minusing from my capacity to be a helper to. It's not an either or. It's not I either help other people or I help myself. Being a helper doesn't mean I have to help myself at the expense of other people, or I have to help other people at the expense of myself. And so all of these scripts that run all the time, these aspects are not separate to each other. Your narrative underpins how you see yourself living up to or fulfilling your values. They're not separate things. They do underpin all of this. But these are questions that we do have to grapple with all the time.
I mean, I think the big thing was that it doesn't have to be either or. But the other thing with all this, particularly like with the value system, a lot of the time they're nice. So you're not ill. You're not like, you're nice. You're a nice person because like altruism is a nice, it's a nice value. Justice is a nice value. Kindness is a nice value. So it really looks very nice to the outside, to the outside, I don't want to say outside world, but it's so nice. So there isn't really a motivation to change, because you're not creating or causing impairment, or, like with psychiatric conditions, it's about how does it impact on you? Because actually you're winning. It looks like you're winning because, you're just so nice and so kind and so, but actually, and so it's harder because the motivation is then about prioritizing yourself, which is so much more difficult to do. And I don't know, like the system also kind of resists, because there's boundaries that then need to be put in place to safeguard yourself. So it's actually harder, I think, or I felt like it was harder, because now I'm doing this for me and I'm having to prioritize me and put the boundary in for myself, which is a lot more difficult than if you were going to be doing it for somebody else.
Yeah.
Because you're a nice person.
Sure. But I think if you look at, values, just like personality characteristics, which I know we'll probably touch on, at some point in our conversation today as well. Like you say, they're all positive things. They're all good traits to have. But it doesn't mean all good things are appropriate things for us, and that they don't all have consequences, So I guess the concepts that we discussed in the coaching program was more about managing what's working for me and what's working against me. So something that's really good can work for you in certain circumstances, and it can work against you in some circumstances. Like sunshine is really great because it gives you vitamin D, but in some circumstances it can work against you if you're in it from 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock for too many hours. It's going to work against you. But is it in and of itself a negative thing. No, it's a great thing. So there are lots of good things, but we have to keep looking at these things in the context of our lives and how we're living, and ask ourselves, grapple these questions. Is what's happening in my world now, and all these elements of me and my makeup and my character and my values and all of these aspects of me, and how I'm managing them. Is this working for me, or is it working against me? Because like you say, none of these things are in and of itself negative things, but they can be working for us or against us. We can be managing them, or we can be mismanaging them. And that's, I think, where that grappling needs to happen in order to effect change where we need to. And that's where our growth happens, in order for us to change, you know.
So I think the key word is managing.
Yeah. So was that process challenging to have to say, okay, I've got to manage this now?
Like I told you before, the disclaimer was the whole process was challenging. Whole process, it's hard work. But again, I'm going to say it's a process, and I really like what you said about just it's about the small wins and the small steps rather than these huge leaps. It's just the small steps. Eventually we get there.
And the awareness, I think that's a big thing. You know, once that light bulb goes on, you're now aware. You know, sometimes we want to change. We have that desire to change, but we're living in this dark room and we don't know. You know, we keep bumping into things, but we just don't know what's in the room. And then the light bulb, somebody puts a light bulb into the lampshade, and now we can see what's there. But it doesn't mean everything gets sorted out just because the lights are on. Now comes the process of slowly saying, okay, now I can see all this stuff. It now takes effort and it takes time in order to get some sense of where's what going to go, like a reorganization and reordering to make some sense and a pathway that's going to be a little bit more free-flowing. But just because the lights are on doesn't mean everything's going to be smooth. So that's going to take, that's the small step journey, you know, going forward. So from values, and then realizing, okay, you know, there's some values that are meaningful to me that I'm not living congruently with. And then there's some values that I need to start exercising towards myself. Was there anywhere in there that there was a challenge of, I have some goals and now I do recognize that they're tied to my values, but I'm feeling stuck in how come I'm being pulled by expectations from the outside world versus what I want? Now I'm so much more aware of what I want, but this outside world is still pulling me.
Because the outside world is always going to, for me, there's always a pull, but it's about what I realized it was about the decisions that I had to make daily. So as it came, I had to make the decisions on a daily basis. It wasn't one decision for all time. Like, you know what I mean? This is how it's going to be now. I'm coming out, the rest of that. It was literally, I can remember having conversations after and just realizing, and being mindful of my value and how is this going to align, and will there be then a disconnect, and then saying, actually, I'd really like to, but I'm not able to right now. I'm so sorry, X, Y, and Z. And even though it was, like only you can. So it was having to it was tapping into a lot of stuff, but just slowly and in the daily decisions.
Yes.
And this daily, even just the daily small decisions, like a simple thing like just prioritizing having breakfast is practicing kindness to myself.
Absolutely.
Because if you're running late and you got to get the kids to school, your breakfast is the thing that then
goes by the wayside.
Goes by the wayside, and saying, well, actually, then we need to wake up a little bit earlier, maybe, but we are having breakfast. Like that's that. And so it's just those decisions on a daily basis.
I love that. Yeah, I love that, because I think so many people see change or see sustainable change as, okay, you know, like having to follow a program, or I'm going to do this diet or that diet. And that's where the issue starts. And, you know, like you're saying, it's that small step, and then doing that small step on a daily basis. And before you know it, then you've changed something, and it's within what's doable for you, and you're able to sustain that. It's not necessarily about following out someone else's plan that was given to you and said, eat this for breakfast. You know, it's coming out of a realization. It's coming out of, okay, a value. Kindness is my value. I need to be kind to myself. In order to be kind to myself, I need to have breakfast. I want to have breakfast. In order to want to have breakfast, I must wake up at half an hour early, and there's a process, you know, and this is following some kind of inner core shift that makes it sustainable, rather than you printed something and it said there, have this for breakfast, preferably within half an hour of waking up because of whatever biological reason they gave you. Which you're probably not going to look at after 3 months. Again. So after values, was there anything else beyond values that you felt was like, you know, pertaining to something deeper? I know that we also touched on aspects of like character strengths and personality. How did you find those elements of the program?
I mean, so, you know, I think the character strengths was also, again, another, because I think, like most people, you often fill out these questionnaires about your character strengths, and you can have a whole long list of them and know, like, my strength is this and that and that. But again, it was about realizing that sometimes even your strength can have an upside and a downside to it. You know, if one of my strengths is, you know, order, organization, and all of that. And while that is a strength, it has also been, you know, there's a downside to it, because it's a cause of a lot of frustration if you're in an environment where there's disorganized, all of those things. So while my strength is my strength, but it can also be part of or add to even my sort of depletion. And so it was also just realizing, in terms of that being your strength, but being able to balance it, you know, helping it to be a bit more tempered than it's just a strength. And again, going back to understanding the strength.
Absolutely.
How do you harness the strength rather than just, you know, give it out? And the personality was an interesting one for me. I mean, we had this wheel and kind of looking at the descriptions of each. I mean, it was a lot easier to pick out within the group who was what.
We had great fun saying, oh, we know which one you are.
We know what so-and-so. But I think, like, what hit home for me was that I had been functioning as, for example, an obliger. Like, I realized that was one of the big things, you know, being an obliger. But I also realized that, you know, it doesn't have to, again, be either or, that while it appeared as though it was one thing, I realized that when I was younger, there was definitely more of the rebel. And I then kind of asked, like, so what happened? Like, what happened to me? Like, what caused this shift, or what was it? And then having to go back and identify, like, specific times where that may have kind of sort of caused that shift from one to the other. And maybe you could do with a bit of both, and you can be both an obliger and a rebel, or an upholder, or, you know, so it was just very interesting.
Yeah. And I think, from my perspective, digging into these underlying things is what makes transformation so important, because for people to shift behavior is very easy when your motivation is high, when you are feeling positive about what you're doing, and then you don't really need much else because you've got a lot going for you that helps you to sustain. It's in those moments when you feel deflated and when you feel like you can't continue, or when times are tough, then that's when you need tools. That's when you need other strategies. That's when you need other motivations to be able to sustain you, to be able to carry your change through. And hence why having access to understanding yourself better and your own personal resources is so important, to be able to carry you through those challenging times. So when you understand yourself better, when you know what your strengths are, when you can say, okay, I'm a person who is organized. So, this is a stressful week, so let me use organization and not, to see, okay, how can I get my meals done? Because I'm an organized person. Let me bring organization into the mix and not just rely on, we'll see how it goes type of, philosophy. And on the same token, then, I'm going away on a holiday and I want to relax. I don't want to be so super organized, and then that's going to stress me out, knowing when to pull organization back. So, those kind of tools are helpful when you want to be able to sustain change, to know that you've got other resources inside of you that you can pull out. But these are things that we just don't always have access to as people. We don't know these things. And then the personality traits that we went through were for the same reason, to understand, okay, we have these goals, we set them out, but we don't always understand why. It's sometimes easier for us to achieve our goals and sometimes harder, because there are these underlying things that either draw us towards our goal or push us away from that. So, you have a thought?
And I think that was the important thing. Like, is this pushing me towards or away? But again, it's like this understanding understanding why we do the things that we do, and understanding our behaviors in order to change them. I think for me made the biggest difference. I'm going to tell you a quick story. Like,
go for it.
You know the story because we chatted about it. It was a simple thing. And I'd never really given it too much thought about this idea. It was about the elimination diet, which is, well, it's not really a diet, but it's like kind of figuring.
It's a method of figuring out your own food plan of what's going to work.
Yes,
for
but
you.
it required like some, preparation, but also like I'm going to have to take, different things to, like, if I was going to be socializing, I was going to have to do it differently and take my food if necessary. And I just said to straight up, like, I'm not doing it. I'm just not doing it. And I mean, it could have stayed there because, like, okay, you don't want to do it. But having to stop and say, okay, what is this really about? Not the fact that I don't want to do, like, I don't want to do it, but it's not about because I don't want to eat correctly. That's not it. But I had to then kind of think about, what is this really about? And where I started off, actually realized it had nothing to do with the diet, but my own stuff, because I struggle. I realized previously people would criticize you for being different or having a different viewpoint. And now I must go and socialize with my different, it was just crazy, the connection. But once I was able to understand it, I mean, I still didn't do the elimination per se, because I just didn't think that was, it wasn't resonating with me, but I was able to look at my eating differently.
Absolutely,
So I think it's really important sometimes to actually just stop and say, what is really going on here?
Yeah, and
what
that
is
process
this really about?
Absolutely, that process helped you to get in touch with just questioning a whole lot of a narrative that you had around shifting certain food elements, because there were some perceptions around that. And there were some thoughts around, okay, what does that say about me if I eat certain things? You know, how am I going to be perceived? And even some like cultural things that were attached there. You know, so if I'm gonna eat this, because I think technically, you know, this kind of stuff like dairy might not be great for me, or gluten might not be great for me. But if I eat non-dairy or non-gluten, what is it going to say about me as a person, and what are other people going to label me as? And so there's this narrative going on that is preventing me from possibly having more optimal health, but we don't stop to consider that. So there's all these deeper things under the surface. So if you had to like sum up some of these values, personality, character strengths in terms of the small step approach, where do you think, where were you, and where has it got you to up until now, as we kind of end our conversation for today? What do you think it enabled you to do?
I mean, it gave me words. And so I was able to articulate, because a lot of the time I find like a lot of things are happening to us. We have lots of fields and all of these things, but I'm not articulating what it is, I'm feeling, why am I feeling? So it gave me words, it gave me a way to articulate, but it also then gave me tools, because one, it was about identifying that this is, you know, I always say, like, you have to name it. And that's how, you know, if you're going to tame it. And oftentimes the fear is about actually just calling it as it is. And I mean, you're really good at that, because there's no hiding. Like, there's no, like, it'll just be, let's just talk about it. But in a, you know, in a way that is relatable. So then, as I say, after you kind of acknowledge it, there is also tools that you can then put in place to kind of begin to examine, and then that's how you're going to bring about the change. Not always easy, because oftentimes the recognizing that and the acknowledging takes quite a lot of courage.
Absolutely.
And vulnerability.
Absolutely.
Because just being honest with yourself it's no easy task, but the rewards have been really great.
Awesome. And on that note, I know I said it the last time, but I'm going to keep saying it. You know, thank you so much for both of those things, your courage and your vulnerability, because those are huge things to display, you know, in these conversations that you're having. You are being hugely courageous and making yourself hugely vulnerable by sharing these things. I mean, these conversations are going to go beyond us in the here and now, and who knows how many people are going to be listening to them in the future to come. So I think you know, your sharing this is definitely going to make an impact on so many people and their lives and their future. So thank you so much for being so open with your journey.
Well, you modeled it for us. You don't have a choice.
Thank you. I mean, this is really like, you know, when you think about Unbecoming, you really are kind of sharing all of the things that you've had to cast off. But the great thing is that, you know, you're also sharing all the ways in which you are seeing the new that you are creating again. So that's also great to share with you, you know, in that too. So I'm looking forward to our next conversation for sure. And thank you again for your time and for all that you shared with us today and your openness with that. Thank you for tuning in. Remember to hit that subscribe button so you can be notified when future videos like these become available. I hope that you found today's conversation beneficial. If you require any psychological or health coaching assistance, you can make contact with Solutions for Life using any of the links in the post description. As you continue on the rest of your day, reflect on the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson. What lies behind you and before you pales in comparison to what lies within you. Take care until next time.